Let's bring in Professor Jeffrey Sachs, an economist and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Professor, welcome to the program. I want to begin with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres going to BRICS, shaking hands with Vladimir Putin, got a lot of criticism from Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, this was a meeting of more than 30 heads of state, a very important meeting, and the Secretary General did a good job going. He spoke to a group that represents in total more than 50% of the world's population. It was a very successful meeting, and I'm glad the Secretary General went.
Let me move on to the actual summit in Kazan. Beyond the symbolism, the optics, certainly a good thing for Vladimir Putin, showing he's not isolated in the world. Beyond that, Professor, what did it achieve?
The BRICS, first of all, made a very strong statement in support of the multilateral system. I think this is quite important. This is not a group that is aiming to overturn the international system. This is a group aiming to make it work properly. So the Kazan Declaration repeatedly refers to the United Nations, UN processes, the UN Charter, and I think that this is very notable. Of course, what the BRICS countries said also is that they do not want a continuation of the unilateral sanctions that the United States or European countries have imposed, which are outside of the UN Charter and, according to the UN General Assembly vote every year, illegal. And so what they're saying is, we want multilateralism that is truly under the UN Charter, not multilateralism that is made in the United States.
One of the countries which knows all about Western sanctions, of course, is Russia. The other one is Iran. And Iran is the newest member of BRICS. President Masoud Pezeshkian also had some choice words to say for the UN, especially the UN Security Council, Professor, for failing to end the conflict in Gaza and Lebanon, basically calling the UN Security Council ineffective.
Well, the UN Security Council is blocked by the U.S. veto because there was a pathway to peace, and that is creating a state of Palestine. And that was up for a vote, and there was an overwhelming majority for it, but the United States vetoed it. So this is a problem. Now, Iran knows that it's being threatened by a massive attack by Israel, with some possibility that the United States would join in that. We know that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been itching for a war with Iran, but not so much between Israel and Iran. He's itching for a U.S. war with Iran. He wants the United States to do his bidding. And this is the great drama of the moment. What Iran showed is it's also not isolated. It's part of the BRICS. It's got friends all over the world. It is not isolated within the Middle East. It has reestablished normal relations with Saudi Arabia, with the other Arab countries. So it's quite a different scene right now from what used to be the case, which was that the U.S. Really had a lot of its way with these countries.
Of course, we're speaking on Thursday, October 24th, which is United Nations Day. Back in 1945, the UN Charter came into force on this day, Professor. The world, though, has changed a lot since that day. There's been a lot of talk about reforming and restructuring the UN Security Council. You already mentioned some of the problems there. How likely is that to happen?
Well, first of all, the UN continues to be the central and only institution at a global scale with the legitimacy of international law. And it's notable, again, that the Kazan Declaration strongly reaffirms the role of the United Nations and that the UN Secretary General was there. Now, making the UN work better is crucial. What's different from 1945 is the United States doesn't run the show. We are in a multipolar world, and back then it was evolving into a two power world, the United States and the Soviet Union, with all of those challenges, but now we're in a truly multipolar world. And this makes the UN Charter even more important than in the past. We know that the structures of the UN reflect 1945. They do not reflect 2024 adequately. We know that the veto is a great frustration because it blocks the will of the overwhelming majority of the international community. We know that very important countries like India, with the largest population in the world right now, actually is not on the UN Security Council because the Security Council was a reflection of 1945 when India wasn't even a sovereign country at the time. So there are lots of changes that are needed in procedures, on the veto, on membership, on how these structures work. But I would say that the role of the UN in enabling us to survive in this dangerous world is more important than ever. And last month there was a summit of the future, and a pact for the future came out of that. And that pact, which was an agreement of the UN member states, calls for significant UN reform so that it can function adequately in the 21st century.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much.